Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hi, Corey. Hi, Stoney. Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. So we have some exciting news for everyone. First of all, our topic today, we are going to be talking about our favorite parenting books and books that have influenced our parenting. You're probably wondering who Stoney and Corey are. Some of you might remember Corey actually from an earlier podcast episode where we talked about sensory processing stuff, but I would like to make an announcement that I am expanding my business and Corey and Stoney are going to be working with me as peaceful parenting coaches. And we have been training for the past couple of months and they are amazing coaches. They're both certified coaches and they're really wonderful, wonderful people. And I'm so excited for you all to get to know them. So let's just do a quick introduction and then we will dive into talking about the parenting books. So Corey, if you could go first and you introduce yourself.
I'm Corey. Because you might remember me. I was on episode 24 where I talked about my journey with Sarah. So if you want to listen to my super challenging parenting journey where I had to hire Sarah as my coach, you can go back to that one. I have 2 children. I have 2 boys. One is 6.5. That's big C. And then I have one who's just about to turn 4, who's little C. I've been working for Sarah now. It's over a year and a half. Over a year and a half ago, I started being her Facebook admin. And then for the last year, I've been working as her virtual assistant. And I absolutely loved having every day being immersed in peaceful parenting. And the more work Sarah gave me, the more I was like, give me more, give me more. So she eventually decided that she would hire coaches. And I was really, really excited to be able to help parents every day, more so than I'm doing already.
Yay. Well, I have had my eye on you for a long time because you have lived the challenging parenting experience and you really have such a great understanding of the peaceful parenting approach. And you have so much empathy for parents who are having a hard time and you've walked that road along with them. And I'm so excited for all of our people in our community to meet you. So thank you and welcome to the team in a new expanded role. Okay, Stoney, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Stoney. I have 2 little kiddos, one who's 3 and one who's almost 4. We're gearing up for kindergarten right now, and one who is just turned 2 and full of beans. And I was introduced to Sarah and her work specifically in this realm about a year ago, started reading more deeply, but I've always been really excited about parenting and excited about thinking about parenting and talking about parenting and engaging about parenting. That's my favorite thing in the whole world, is that I get to talk to other parents and think about what this journey means and what it means for us and what it means for our kids and how we can make it work for everybody in a family and make a family run. So I hope that I get to meet more and more people involved in this world. And I'm excited to talk about parenting books with you all today because it's one of the things that brings me a lot of joy.
Well, I've got to share the story of how you came to be working with me, which was you were in my membership. And in office hours every week, we try not to have it be the Sarah show and the members support each other. And I always say, who has any other ideas to support this member with their challenge? And Stoney always had great things to say. Like every time Stoney talked, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like I hadn't even thought of that. That's so great. And you got to this point where you were like tentatively raising your hand. You're like, I don't know, I think you felt like you were embarrassed about always having something to say. And at some point I thought, if I ever need anyone to work with me besides Corey, Stoney would be amazing. I wonder what she does. And so I asked you and you said, well, I'm a lawyer, but I'm kind of in between things. And I thought to myself, oh, she'll never want to do something like this, but you said, yes, I would be very interested. And then I remember one day I said, can you stay after for an office hours? And everyone else hung up and you said, I don't know if you remember this, you said, am I talking too much? I said, no, quite the opposite. Like, do you want to train to be a parenting coach with me? And that was, I don't know, 6 months ago, maybe.
And it's been wonderful. It's been so exciting getting to think about these things in even more depth and engage on these issues. And yeah, what could be better? Nothing.
Yay, team. Great. So let's dive into our parenting books. Maybe I'll start and then we'll take turns. So my most influential parenting book was Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn. I actually read one of his books called Punished by Rewards before I even had kids. And it was about basically how rewards and punishment don't help us in the way that our culture thinks that they do. And they actually get in the way of our long-term goals and our intrinsic motivation to do things as humans. And that really stuck with me. I was planning on being a teacher, and he talks about rewards and punishments in schools. He talked about it in families and in the workplace. And then I had my first child. And when he was about 2, Unconditional Parenting came out. And I was just blown away by it. Like, it was such a wonderful way of thinking about children and our relationship with them. And it was something that I hadn't seen anywhere else. I remember when my oldest son, Lee, when he was, maybe 18 months old, 20 months old, he was crying and somebody said, oh, don't pick him up. He's just trying to manipulate you. And I just thought, oh, I've spent the last 18, 20 months building this bond with my child. Why would I not respond to his needs? And I felt like I kind of got that advice everywhere in the culture, from things that I would read or see, or people in my life who I know they were well-meaning. But in Alfie Kohn's book, I really got permission to not be harsh, and that I could be on his team and that I could meet his needs. And that was actually the right thing to do, to have like this collaborative approach to life and our relationship. And that book was the most influential book, I think, on me and my parenting. And actually, I lied. I'm going to go with my second book because I think they're sort of related. My second most influential book was Peaceful Parents, Happy Kids by my mentor, Dr. Laura Markham. And I read that when my oldest son, I'm using him as like my guidelines for when these books came out, he was about 12. And with that book, I found, there's a name for this that I've been doing. It's Peaceful Parenting. That was my first introduction to the name Peaceful Parenting. And I just found that Dr. Laura's book really encompassed all of the how of how Alfie Kohn's book was the why, right? So Alfie Kohn's book to me is the why, and it's the philosophy and the feeling of peaceful parenting, but it doesn't have much of the how do you do it. But Dr. Laura's book was the first book that I read. It was like, this is how, if you want somebody else to be able to do this kind of parenting, hand them this book. So those are my 2 books that I found were the most influential on my parenting. And we're going to put the links to all of these in the show notes if y'all haven't heard of them or you want to look them up. So maybe, Corey, do you want to share maybe your first book that you have found influential?
Yeah. So I find it really hard to narrow down my books. I'm that person that whenever anyone says something like that they're having a problem with, I'm like, there's a book for that. And I want to hand them a book. So the book I want to talk about, I actually read really recently. It's Shame-Proof Parenting by Mercedes Zamudio.
Who was on the podcast. I'll just say
yes,
she was on the podcast. Yeah.
That's how I heard her, was on the podcast. And she just had such empathy for parents that I knew I really wanted to read her book, because I think this book is for people who struggle with perfectionism, because her book is all about healing. It's all about healing from shame, and shame is what leads us to be perfectionists. It's trying to protect ourselves from that horrible feeling. And so she started a movement to stop shaming parents. And she was explaining, if you want people to act better, treat them better. If you're just putting all this shame onto parents, that's actually going to make them parent worse. And she talked about this idea of parenting defense mechanisms. And basically that the more we shame parents, the more they build up these defense mechanisms to protect them from the awful feeling of not being worthy or good enough. And I remember in your parenting course, you talked about shame as it feels so bad, it almost feels like you might die. And she talks about that. And she's like, that's what leads to some really defensive behavior. And one example she used was isolation. And that's what I did. When I was having a really hard time with parenting, I started isolating myself. I just, everywhere I went, people were judging me. People I didn't know were seeing this kid with challenging behaviors and criticizing me and commenting. So I started hiding from the world. And she has really amazing suggestions about how to sort of shame proof yourself when you're experiencing things like that. And her big one for that is stop hanging around people who make you feel bad. Like, order the groceries. Don't go hang out in the grocery store if they're going to make you feel bad. And I ironically found that it was during lockdown, when we were the most isolated, that I started coming out of isolation, where I found like another family who loved me and my children unconditionally. And we'd go see each other every day at the park. And it just like built me up again. And she's like, as you do that, as you shame proof yourself, you're still going to encounter all those things, but they're not going to hurt you the way they did before. So I came out of isolation stronger because I had spent all this time with this family who just loved me and my kids unconditionally, right? So that's my shout out to the Joseph family.
Nice.
She listens to your podcast. I know my friend's listening.
Hello, Corey's friend.
Yeah. But she's really funny too. She reminds me, Mercedes reminds me of Lynn Lyons.
Okay.
So
great.
even though this is a really serious book about shame and healing from some of the most painful feelings you can experience, she's so funny about it. And I found that really made it such a quick and easy read. And I came out of it just feeling like she had hugged me. And like, it's Laura Markham's like that too. When you read Peaceful Parenting, Happy Kids, it's that feeling of like a warm hug that you've just read. So I don't know, I really recommend this book to anyone. And she does kind of tongue in cheek say, stop buying all the books.
Except for this one.
She does kind of say like, it's okay to, as long as you are meeting your family with empathy and prioritizing connection, you don't need anything else. And
Nice.
go buy the books after you've kind of dealt with your shame and focus on those two things. So
Nice.
what a fantastic resource for parents.
So in line with peaceful parenting and what we're teaching and helping parents with, right? The empathy and connection. And I when I used to teach in-person workshops, I used to say, if you forget everything that I've told you today, just remember empathy and connection.
Yes. And that's what this book is all about, is it's just like, bring it back to, and also she's just like, you're supposed to be messy humans. That's okay. So I love that. Anyways.
I love that. Thanks.
Stoney.
Okay. Stoney.
The first book, and it was a book that I read when I first child was still, I was on parental leave. I was home. I was trying to figure out what parenting was going to mean for our family. And that was the book I read was Simplicity Parenting, Kim John Payne, who also wrote Soul of Discipline, which we also really liked in our family at the time. I don't know if I would feel comfortable recommending it now, but it was, both of them sort of spoke to the idea that you could allow your family life to be quiet, that you could allow your home and the culture in your home and to be simple, that a 4-course dinner wasn't better than a 2-course dinner or a 1-course dinner or a peanut butter and jam sandwich every Tuesday night. And that was really a helpful idea for me, because I was trying to form my thoughts about what it meant to build a family and grow a family and have a culture in our home.
It also, can I just say, it also is such a good antidote to what we see around us with like the overscheduling and, everyday activities and our busyness, like where our culture is so addicted to busyness. So I haven't read that book, so it sounds like it would be a nice antidote to that.
And I'm a person who is attracted to that by accident. Like I think I fell into that and do fall into that naturally. I would overschedule my kids, I think, if I didn't think intentionally and try not to.
Mm-hmm.
I would sign us up for yesterday kindergarten introduction. There were parents talking about all the classes their kids are doing. And I thought, oh, am I making a mistake? And then I could go back to the foundation that I have, which is, what's my priority? My priority is that the time that my family has together is paramount. And that's what we're doing right now. Will that be what we do in 10 years? Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's what's working for us and for our kids at this stage. And not that it doesn't, other things work for other families, but it was really a nice reminder about the benefit of having read that book, which says, you can try to eliminate distractions, you can eliminate the stress that you can eliminate, and you can try to be available and present for your family. And for me, that I know that that's the only way that I'm going to be able to show up empathetically. It's the only way I'm going to be able to show up as my full self if I know that we have stretches of time that aren't scheduled and we can be together. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if the whole book needs to be read. I don't know, but I loved it because it allowed me to think, okay, there's a real benefit to just being present. There's a benefit to story time at bedtime where you're making up the stories and helping your kids process what they're going through actively. There's a benefit to routine. One of my favorite takeaways from that book, and I think about it all the time, is that for kids at most ages, but especially little ones, routine is a huge benefit and it doesn't prevent flexibility later. And so there's a story in the book which says, just because you're a family that set up a lot of routines doesn't mean you can't vary. And in fact, going outside of the routine is easier if your kids know what to do. And I think about that all the time. There's this example, which is, the family who always does the same thing every night wants to go to the basketball game randomly on a Tuesday, and they do. And they come home, and instead of the kids melting down and having a really hard time, they just go upstairs and brush their teeth and go to bed because they know what the next stages are of the evening. And trying to allow for this idea, especially during COVID, where I've gotten into this sense, like, will my kids ever be able to manage a babysitter? Will my kids ever be able to manage? They're so used to having me available to them. They're so used to these routines. Will they be able to go outside of it? And what we are finding is like, yeah, they do pretty well because they know and trust that we can get back to the routine that's existed. So just, simple ideas like that, I think were really beneficial to me. And I am really grateful for them. In Sarah's membership, at one point, there was this idea that you should take something off the schedule. And I remember thinking like, like I've already taken everything that I can off the schedule. There's nothing left to take off because we're trying at the moment to just have our family life be a little bit quiet and calm, and we'll see if that lasts. But for now,
I guess you didn't need that piece of advice to take something off the schedule. So that's good.
Well, it's a good piece of advice though. It just is a funny one to implement when you aren't doing anything.
Yeah.
Stoney, that piece of advice in the membership was influenced by me having read that book. So I suggested we write that piece to Sarah.
Full circle. Well, I always feel lucky that my kids weren't overscheduled, mostly out of my laziness, because I live someplace that makes it pretty hard to take kids places. It's just transportation sort of inaccessible. Well, not inaccessible, but takes a lot of effort. And I was too lazy. I was like, I don't want to spend hours every day back and forth going around. So I was like, let's just play. Let's go to the park.
Well, I recently went through the process of trying to decide what to do for kindergarten for my kid, and thinking we have like a family value mission statement sort of thing. And I could go back to that and think, okay, well, what's really important? And in the end, one of the big factors, which sounds goofy, is like, what's the closest school? Mm-hmm. What's going to give us the most time in the morning so that we don't feel rushed in the morning? So my kids get there.
That's
and
not
hopefully,
goofy.
Well, yeah, thank you. But it felt like, am I just being lazy that I don't want to trek them somewhere else on the bike? And that book felt like it gave me permission to slow down in the early years, and hopefully later on too, when it's necessary, but without feeling like it has to be slow every day, mm-hmm. but that you can do that. And that is still a meaningful family life. Yeah.
Great. Corey, what's your other parenting book that was influential for you?
Well, this one was actually pretty easy to think of because anyone who's part of our Facebook group knows I bring this book up at least twice a week. So that's Raising Human Beings by Ross Greene. And what I love about this book is so often when we're helping parents, they say, okay, you're going to take away the punishments, the threats, and the bribes. What do I do instead? Right? There's just that fear of what do I do then? And what Ross Greene does with this book, and he has a couple of books and they're all saying the same thing, they just kind of help with different kinds of kids, is, well, this is exactly what you should do instead. I have a system to help you transition away from those things into a partnership with your kids. So his system, he calls it's collaborative and proactive solutions, but he calls it CPS for short. And it's just basically the idea of, when instead of looking at all these behaviors that you don't like from your child, look and think, what are some problems we're having in our house? Make a list of them. And then one by one, work through them with your kids. And he has like a very specific system of just approaching your kids and saying something like, I've noticed you're having a hard time getting along with your little brother lately. What's up? and then just letting them tell you what is up. Let them go on as long as they need to and get as much information as you can so you can really understand why they're having trouble. And this is not the time to tell them they're wrong or to try and teach or do anything. He calls it the empathy step. So it's just about like listening and reflecting back what you're hearing to really understand your child's perspective. And then you have a chance to say what your concerns are. So after you've validated everything they said, you're then just going to say something like, I understand. At the same time, I can't have you hitting your little brother. How can we solve this problem? And then you work together and you just come up with some solutions. And you might have to go back and forth through this process many times. But what I love about it is he has a different tone than some of the other authors we're talking about. He's a little bit more no nonsense. He's really straightforward with how he approaches it. And so I know, like, when I talk about with my husband, he loves it because it's just like so concrete and he feels like he can just like very easily do it with both of our sons. We started doing this with my oldest when he was probably about 4. And now we don't need to do like a formal talk like that. I'll more just like look at him and be like, I've noticed, what's up? And he'll just start automatically telling me everything.
Great.
And then we'll sort of like come up with our solution together. But he really writes the book from the perspective, if you're brand new, if you have a million questions for why this would work, and answers them all. But I also think that if you already are peaceful parenting, like a lot of our parents are who are in our Facebook group, it gives you a really like clear plan for if you're just having things are pretty good in your house, but you have like one reoccurring problem that's just really holding you back. It gives you just like a really concrete tool that you can use to sort of like problem solve through. And it's so empowering. So like my son loves it. The second I say, what's up, his eyes light up and he's like, ooh, this is my chance to tell you everything that's bothering me about this particular issue.
I love that.
It's just a great process.
That's so great. And, one thing I also like, I haven't read Raising Human Beings, and I love that you chose 2 books that I haven't read, or actually all 3 of them so far I haven't read, but other Ross Green work that I've followed, he also talks about letting go of things like, is maybe the solution here is just to let go of this power struggle. And like, let's really hone down to what are the really most important things that we need to solve. And I think that is also really can be comforting. Like, there are some things it's okay to just let go of, like, you can wear your pajamas to school. Like, let's let go of that getting dressed hassle, right? Or whatever it is. That's just an example. But thanks, Corey. Stoney, I think your next book was a not parenting book. We thought it would be fun to bring in.
Yeah, the other books that I think I'd like to talk about are about, still about your home but more about division of labor and with your partner, if you have a partner, and how you set up those structures in your space. So these are both books that I also read while I was on my first parental leave, which I think they're really good books if you really want to scare your partner straight. Like if you really want to freak your partner out, they see the titles of these books while you're reading them and they'll get the message that something's up. And I should say, shout out to my partner who is wonderful and very involved and engaged parent. It's not like, but I'm a person who really cared about these issues before kids. I cared about these issues, in the division and how our home is structured before, when we were both just young working adults. And it still mattered to me a lot. But the books are How Not to Hate Your Husband After Kids, which again, great title.
Who's the author?
The title is Janice Dunn.
Janice Dunn. Okay.
Yeah. And the second one is All the Rage, Mothers, Fathers, and the Myth of Equal Partnership by Darcy Lockman.
Okay.
And the first is more memoir. The second is more statistics, and it includes 50 interviews that she did with families where she talked to them about how they manage things in their own homes. But she also brings through a lot of, of all the books parenting books or parenting adjacent books that I've read, it was the one where I took a lot of photos of specific sections and sent them to pals and said, I think it's really important that we talk about this with our partners. I think it's really important that we make sure that we're thinking about these things. So I should say both are about heterosexual families. And the reality is that there's a missing chunk of research that hasn't been done. And that's an unfortunate thing. But I think there's things that we can all learn in families, all families, especially if we have one primary parent or default parent or whatever.
Shout out to Eve Rodsky, who, I haven't read either of the books that you said, but I have read Fair Play, which I think is a handbook for how to do a division of labor that is more fair in the family. And she talks about how that she found in her research, even with families with two same-sex partners, there still was a default parent, that it didn't matter. Even outside of heterosexual relationships, there usually was one parent who was the default, and that's sort of what we're trying to avoid here, is having, there's one person that is taking on more than their fair share of the work and the responsibility and the mental load, I think, especially.
Absolutely. And both of these books acknowledge that the data doesn't exist and that's a missing piece, but they sort of, I don't know, I just wanted to acknowledge that so that I'm not sort of glossing over it. But in All the Rage, I was looking back over it, and it's that father's participation in household, in this, again, fathers, but the less dominant partner or less responsible partner, I don't know what language I want to use there, but participation in household division of labor was 35% of work done in the household. And that was in 2000, and it hasn't increased since then.
Wow.
So one thing that they point out is that the not default parent, the not primary parent, is doing more and more of the childcare, but they're doing less of the household labor after kids show up. So kids come on the scene and the not primary parent is still engaged and actively is participating in the home, but they're only parenting and they're not capable, or they claim to not be capable, or they don't multitask. So whereas default parent is really commonly cleaning and caring and cooking and doing all those things at once and making the household run, there's sort of, anyways, I think the thing about these books is not that they don't tell you anything you don't know, but that there's some comfort in realizing that other families are going through similar issues, and it gives you a place to start conversations and to sort of focus and allow for hard conversations in your home about what your priorities are and what you value and what's possible. And actually, neither of those books, but another book that I had mentioned, Impossible Parenting by Olivia Scobie, who's a MSW in Toronto. She was a social worker. She has a strategy about division of labor that we use, which is that there's captains of tasks and then responsibility flows from that. But I don't know if we would have ever come up with that if I hadn't read it. I don't know what we would have done. We would have fallen into a lot of default positions on what roles were whose if we hadn't actively thought about it. And I think it feels pleasurable knowing that we made choices. It feels, it's a lot easier to cook dinner, knowing that this is labor that is recognized and this is labor. It's a lot easier to order the groceries and do all the pieces that make things flow when you know that that's labor that's important in your family. But there was How Not to Hate Your Husband has more specific recommendations. All the Rage is just more, it made me pretty angry for myself and for others about sort of what it means to become a parent and what it means to shift into this phase of life where often one person is doing more of that work. But I think for me, I know that when my relationship with my co-partner is going well, I'm a much better parent. And if we can agree to what the terms are that make that flow, and we can find solutions, like we each get a break on the weekend for a chunk of time, we each get nights off, and we found ways that we can fill in for each other to make sure that both people feel that their time is valued. And that's been really important for us. And those books helped.
A point that Eve Brodsky makes in Fair Play is, sometimes you might have one parent who's working outside the home and one parent who's not. And you might agree that the parent who's not working outside the home takes on more duties within the home and within childcare. But the big point is that everyone's aware of everything that's involved. It's not just like you have this like magic home that runs itself and, all the kids show up at birthday parties with presents and, get their shots every year or whatever. But I think that's really important too, to recognize it's not that everything has to be 50-50 in your house. And
Absolutely.
you might find that you do want it to be 50-50, say if both parents are working outside the home, but that it's not that the default parent is that their labor is unnoticed and unrecognized. And that I think is super important. Like you might do more of the childcare and house stuff, but your partner should know everything that you're doing. She has this hilarious story of one couple that was working through this, and the mom started to CC the dad on all of the emails having to do with the kids, like, play dates and doctor's appointments and teacher interviews and all of that stuff. And the dad said, "Stop spamming me with all these emails." And it's just like, sort of I think that's emblematic of how some parents are. And it's not just the dads. We're not here to throw dads under the bus, but how when you're not aware of how much work it is, it can seem overwhelming.
Absolutely. And for us, the thing that shocked my spouse the most was when we talked about clothes, like kids' clothes, and how much work it was, because we get lots of hand-me-downs, which is great, but we also have to sort of fill in gaps, and how much work goes into acquiring and then cleaning and putting them away and doing the laundry and getting them dressed every day, which seems like it would be a small thing. But once we wrote out a list that included where I really delineated all the different tasks that went into it, it was really helpful, so that labor felt visible, and then you can sort of feel ownership and some pride in it, like it's not that it is just disappearing, and we can't expect our kids to show gratitude, right? That's not their jobs in our families. But so one of the takeaways is saying thank you. And we say thank you for everything. So much so that our kids say thank you for everything. And it always shocks the grandparents who are sort of like, I didn't understand why he said thank you for, this or that. It was so nice. And it's like, that's because in our home, we try to acknowledge even small labors. Like if someone unloads the dishwasher, that is something that's going to get gratitude from somebody else, because it's easy, it's free, and it makes the house feel the tone in the house improve. It makes us all feel better about the things that we're doing to keep everybody alive and fed and running. Yeah.
That's great. I when you mentioned the clothing, I used to call it the clothing switchover. And we also got tons of hand-me-downs, and my kids are 3 years apart. So there was always a storage period in between. So like you couldn't directly go from oldest to middle because they had to grow into the clothes. So it used to take me 2 days. Like, I'm not joking. It would take 2 days. I'd have all the bins out in the living room, sorting everything, what needs mending, this is going to go away for 2 years. Anyhow, I love that example of one of those really invisible pieces of work that is really actually a lot of work.
So much. And my kids are finally like catching up in size to each other. So I don't have to store clothes between them. And I'm so grateful, because it just included so much cleaning, and you clean it on the way out. But my daughter this morning put on a shirt and she said, "No, this is Arthur's." And I had to say, no, it's yours now. It was the first time she was wearing it. I swear this is yours, but we'll see how that all goes. How that plays out.
Funny. Okay, well, yeah, so we'll put all of these books in the show notes. There's such a great wealth of information. I love the sharing of minds here. Let's do one more, which is, Corey, what was your non-parenting, parenting adjacent, or a book that influenced your parenting that wasn't specifically about parenting?
Okay, so my book is Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And this book really works well with what you're talking about, Stoney. So this book is all about explaining why, and in particular, women are so burnt out. And it gives you a lot of amazing suggestions for how to feel better. And it talks about all of my favorite topics in one book. I think that's why I love it so much, because it talks about the nervous system, self-compassion. It talks about the problems with diet culture and wellness culture. And it talks about patriarchy. And it just, all of my favorite things that I would just love to stand about and scream at the top of my lungs about to pretty much everyone I know, it talks about. So it's one of those books where I keep on buying it for everyone I know and just handing it to them and being like, "You're welcome. You're going to feel better after you read this book." The biggest part that I found was life-changing for me was learning about how to complete the stress cycle. So I've gone to the Sarah Rosensweet School of Learning about your nervous system. So I felt like I knew a lot already, but it explained basically on how you can deal with your stressors. You have to deal with the stress. So in order to, complete the stress cycle and feel better, every time that you get hijacked and go into either fight, flight, or freeze, you need to complete that stress cycle. Otherwise, it builds up inside of you. Basically, it's the same thing we talk about in peaceful parenting with the emotional backpack, right?
I was just going to say that. I'm like, it's exactly like the emotional backpack. We got to empty that emotional backpack.
Yes. And they say the same thing, right? That, laughter and crying are two great ways to empty, to complete the stress cycle, to empty the emotional backpack. But the big thing that she talked about that I found really helped me was talking about doing vigorous exercise, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day. is one of the best things you can do, because it's a very physical thing that sends a message to your brain that you have completed the stress cycle. And so I started doing that, and I couldn't get over how much better I felt. I was doing all the other things. I have an amazing self-compassion practice, I think a lot because of learning from you, Sarah, and reading Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion, which is also another game changer of a book. Meditation is such a big part of my life. I meditate every day for at least 20 minutes. But I needed that vigorous exercise to really complete the stress cycle and make me feel better. It does help, even just walking the dog every day, little things like that helps. But when I started just like really upping the ante, I felt so much better. So I found this book just really helped me show up so much better as a parent, because I just changed my whole schedule and I made it a non-negotiable that I was doing some sort of physical exercise for at least 20 minutes every day.
I remember you recently told me that you're judiciously using your screen time in the morning, or not your screen time, but your kids' screen time, so you can do your 20 minutes of rowing. I love that.
Yeah. So, and like, it's so hard because, we all hear about you should limit screen time, but I can't get over what good use of screen time this is, because I know my kids are 100% focused and safe. They're not going to need me in any way. I put my headphones on, I get really excited music going, and I row. And it's so interesting because in the book, they talk about how you may all of a sudden just find yourself crying or different things like that. And that's like you releasing all this built up. And that happened to me so many times. I couldn't get over it. All of a sudden, like rowing, listening to a great song, and all of a sudden, like tears are coming down. Like, what's wrong with me? But
nothing. You're releasing all the stress out of your body. And they actually, show that tears that you cry actually have cortisol in them. So you're actually literally releasing the cortisol from your body through your tears.
Yes. And in the book, they call it the feels.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if it starts happening, don't panic. It's just the feels. And I was like, I'm glad they warned me, because it just kept happening when I was rowing, and I'd come up with like tears streaming and being like, that was the greatest row. And my kids were like, oh, okay. But they think it's the greatest thing ever.
But you say that was the highlight of that, part of the highlight of that book for you, because for me, that was the thing that changed after reading that book. I started running. I had never been a runner. I did other kinds of exercise. I commuted as a bicyclist, but I realized that I had to start doing something to complete the stress cycle. And it's just been so fantastic. And nothing could have convinced me that I had to start running. I don't think I was really, my friends will joke, but it's true that I always was pretty sarcastic about it for various reasons. But I am so glad to have read that book and the change that it brought from just the difference in how I feel after I go for a run. I look forward to it finally. Yeah. And because it is doing something for me, other than because I can place it in my life as having a purpose that is sort of allowing me to do things for my family and for myself and everything else. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned that as the highlight for you too, Corey.
I love the crossover, and I knew you two would get along because you didn't know each other before you started training with me. So happy that we've got this, camaraderie, and thank you both for joining me on the podcast today. And I look forward to our community people getting to know you and getting supported by you. And we will put some information in the show notes for if you want to work with Corey or Stoney, how to do that. And also just feel free to email me or DM me, reach out, and we'll look forward to years of working together and supporting parents. And I'm so excited to have you on board.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having us on today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.